Ladies and gentlemen, while Panel 1 highlighted the perspectives from 3Ps and academia on how to foster digital inclusion, this next panel will deep dive into how different organizations promote e-readiness among their communities. Each speaker will have 7 minutes to present. Our first speaker is Mr. Andrew Buay, Vice President for Singtel Group's Corporate Sustainability. He is also talent coach at Singtel's Australian subsidiary, Optus Future and Emerging Leaders Program.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Don't start the bell yet. I thought today what I will do is, because there's a lot of discussion around digital inclusion, bridging the digital divide, I thought I will talk about the other side. Once you've crossed the divide, we are sometimes faced with this thing called the digital chasm. I call it the digital chasm. And enjoy the photo. There's nothing worse than hiking over the top of the peak, thinking you are into the meadows, only to see it's a steep cliff and a drop after that you've got to cross. So I use this diagram just to provide a simple framework for framing what I'll talk about. When you think about the aspect of the digital inclusion, it's about how do we get the peripheries, the edges, in a sense, access to quite a lot of other things we take for granted, whether it's the internet, computer technology, knowledge, information, and skills. And as I mentioned, I'll focus on that middle part, falling off the cliff that is starting to happen in many different dimensions. But I also talk about how with digital is actually creating the bridge in a very different and innovative way that brings things like healthcare and education and a lot of other things that otherwise you can't bring out to some of what I'll call some of these marginalized communities. So this is a piece of global research that was done by one of our partners, DQ Institute, in 2018, that was assessing what we call the cyber risks of kids in the 8 to 12 years old bracket. And what this data showed is globally, as was shared earlier, it's actually a global problem, especially with our youth and our kids, while we're giving them earlier and earlier access to digital devices and access to the internet and to social media. Many are facing cyber risks, whether the cyber risks is issues of cyberbullying, mental health issues, identity issues, etc. And actually Singapore is just slightly better than the global average, and I use this word average now very cautiously after Prof. Uta's presentation earlier, but Singapore is no exception. And then you have places like Philippines, you get extremities. It's really relating to child pornography and child trafficking and sex trafficking and all that, various different exposures. And if you look at Singapore, from the research at least in 2018, it's about 45,000 samples, 40 schools and organizations, things like cyberbullying, tacit type of bullying, and even cyberbullying is a broad spectrum of different dimensions. The research also showed that if you correlate some of these cyber risks, there's a correlation between kids who have not only just mobile access, but those who have mobile access and very high social media hours spent. And on the far right, you're looking at the average screen time. I keep now thinking every time I use the word average, I'm going to get a question from Professor Uta, but it's not necessarily the length of time, but as was commented earlier, it's the time that's spent in productive versus unproductive type usage. So clearly a global issue. And it's based on a lot of the data and the research and even our engagement with parents, with teachers, as part of our stakeholder engagement, that we identified one of the key focus. We are in the digital, the telecoms, the ICT business. And yes, while we want to make profits, how do we make profits responsibly? So that even as we want more people to be using phones and internet, how do they use it safe and responsibly? So digital citizenship and online safety has been a key part of our sustainability community impact program. It's about how do you create that inclusion while ensuring the well-being. And what we have tried to do since 2013, with different measures of success and even failures, is to try and take a bit of a holistic approach. When we look at the problems, you can't average what the issue is. We try and look at the unique problems, and some issues need to be tackled through education, building awareness. So we have programs in schools, with DQ Every Child that enables kids to learn through gamified learning, but at the same time, the ability to learn skills in a fun way by the ability to assess whether they've got any exposures. We've even, a couple of years ago, gone to special needs schools and identified that teachers were bootstrapping information to try and teach kids with cognitive diversity, and which they have even greater exposure. And we created a cyber wellness toolkit for these teachers. We launched and just relaunched an updated Not a Newbie, which is a parent-based resource, because one of the big challenges we saw is parents can be part of the equation of both the problem or the solution. We've also looked at products and services from the retail all the way up to the enterprise. And actually 3 years ago, working with NCSS, we identified that a lot are already falling off the cliff. How do we support them, even with cyber well-being counseling? And we co-funded $1 million each with the government to run what is Help 123, a national helpline for counseling the more extreme cases. But actually a lot of parents are calling in, and teachers, not just the youth. We try and measure the effectiveness of the improvements of kids as they go through some of the programs. And one of the things we are working with DQ Institute is to try and establish a global framework that can provide some comprehensive lens to the different technical and cognitive and even meta-cognitive, and I don't even understand what that means, and social-emotional type competencies, because what we're seeing is there are a lot of programs globally that can be tapped, many focus in a particular area. There are some gaps, and actually we're part of a global task force, even together with the Skills Future Singapore, because IEEE, OECD, and World Economic Forum has identified there's this opportunity to try and create a bit more of a framework that can identify what represents the kind of digital skills and digital acumen. Then very quickly, we do run a program for the last 4 years, recognizing the role of technology in social impact. So we've been working with tech startups developing digital capabilities that can bring healthcare to remote parts of the Philippines, or education in a gamified way to the low-income kids that have dropped out of schools, or psychological counseling for remote farmers who are suffering from depression. So again, when we think of this digital inclusion, that's how you bring the marginalized access to information and tech. How do you make sure you avoid the risks? But now with technology, you can actually bring a lot of what are core basic services that otherwise were constrained by physical presence and physical delivery to a lot more peripheries of society, whether it's geographical or otherwise. And I'll then elaborate on some of the insights and perspectives at the panel later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Buay. We now have Ms. Carrie Tan, who is the founding executive director of Daughters of Tomorrow. The organization enables livelihoods and financial independence for underprivileged women in Singapore. Since 2012, DOT has impacted more than 800 women through community mobilization to provide them with skills and access to job opportunities. Let's welcome Ms. Tan.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm a bit nervous here because this tech is really not my expert area, but I think Andrew set a very good stage for me to explain a bit of context of why I'm here. Even our intern, when she was sitting there, she's like, what has this got to do with our work? And I think precisely because people see or don't see the link that is important that we share our perspective. And I think before I go into my slides, I want to kind of borrow Andrew's image of the two hills, the chasm. And I think we kind of right now are standing on one side, on one peak. And then we look over there, it's like, oh, all those people who are not digitally ready and we need to get them digitally ready, all of them are seniors, right? I hope that today's presentation, in a short 7 minutes, I can give you a glimpse into another very important and overlooked community that is standing at the other side, and we don't know who they are, or a lot of us don't know who they are. And it could provide some understanding as to why, despite a lot of resources and programs and schemes that has been provided for digital readiness, it seems not yet to have reached this particular community. So Daughters of Tomorrow is a registered IPC charity, and we work with low-income women in Singapore. Some basic traits about these women: their age is from 20s to 60s. 80% of them are from ethnic minority groups in Singapore. and 20% of them are migrant women. One important piece of information that I didn't include in this slide is that 80% of these women have secondary school or lower educational qualifications. And you can imagine in a society and economy like Singapore, how difficult it is for them to access jobs. So our organization basically focuses on helping to prepare them for job readiness. We have many different programs that build their confidence, soft skills, etc., and we bridge them to employers. Amongst the varied programs that we have is an IT literacy program, and later on I'll share some of the very important insights that we learned ourselves trying to roll out this program to them. So just in 2018, last year, we had between 400 to 500 women actively access our programs, and the success rate is about 30%, right? We managed to put 140 of them into successful employment. And interestingly, in the beginning of Journey, when we surveyed the 1,000+ women in our database and asked them, what job would you like? You know, they all say, I want admin job. Then we asked them, do you know how to use computer? Don't know. Oh, okay, so that's going to be a problem. So we realized that in order to help these women access the jobs that they wanted, which was admin jobs, there's a whole different story about that. They didn't really want admin jobs. They basically wanted jobs that gave them office hours so that they could juggle their childcare needs. But that's a different aspect of a barrier that we encounter. But I'll delve deeper into this IT literacy and this desire to enter very basic admin jobs, right? So we went into designing an IT program in August 2016, that's like Run Zero, our first pilot, and we took a year, almost a year to refine it 3 times, right? I think we had pretty good success because between the first time we piloted in 2016 to now, class enrollment started off at a very dismal 5 to 7 women. And then now, every time we run it, we have more than 20 women wanting to be there. So we learned a lot. I personally learned a lot. And there were some very, very key misconceptions we had about digital savviness and IT literacy. Number 1, young people all know how to use IT. It's a very common refrain, right? Number 2, digital access is about having devices and Wi-Fi. That's true, but not the entire truth, right? And IT classes can help people to learn to use IT. Again, it's one of those statements that you can't say that is wrong. Okay, the interesting insights that we got from this, from our experience, is that digital savviness is not related to age, but social connectedness. And how do we know this? I remember the first time in 2016 we ran our IT program at Rockwell Automation's office. And we had 7 women come in, and they all looked pretty young. In fact, I spoke to one of them, and I asked her, how old are you? And let's call her Siti. She said, oh, I'm 25. I'm like, oh, okay. Are you excited to be coming to class? And she said, yes, like, I haven't touched a laptop in years. And I wanted to ask her what her story is, right? And I found out, to my horror, that this 25-year-old woman, whom we would assume would be very savvy digitally, did not have access to a laptop since she left school or dropped out of school 10 years ago when she was 15. And another woman, very close to her age, came and she was again all excited, very shy, so I tried to break the ice and talk to her. And she said, you know, this is the first time in 7 years that I've stepped out of my house and gone anywhere without my husband or my children. And those are typical profiles of the women who come into our programs. The other thing that we realized is because in order to run an IT program, we needed to have laptops, which we sourced from our corporate partners. They gave us second-hand laptops. And then we, put down with Wi-Fi. And we realized that the other thing that stop them from actually using the devices. I think this is a very common thing, right? Whenever we, for those of us who are not so savvy, open a computer, something happens, there's a software update, we don't understand the message, and something doesn't move, or you click so many things that it doesn't move, you just shut it down, or you try to call someone for help, right? And the thing is, in this community of low-income families, they have no one to call for help. So even if you gave them a device that's running, the moment they encounter some technical difficulties, there's no IT support, right? So then, the beginning of that journey just comes to an abrupt end. And what we realized also that getting the women to learn to use IT is really about practice, applicability, and habituation. And I discovered this when I spoke to my mom. I said, Mom, you're an accountant. How did you learn to use the computer? And she said, I only know how to use the accounting software. Everything else, I'm not sure. And I said, did you ever go for class? And she said, I did. But then after that, I went home, and in 2 weeks, I forgot everything. And that was an inspiration for me to start to look into designing our programs in a way that created continued usage. I'm going to ask for a bit more time. So what we do is we partnered with our corporate partners and community partners, and we designed our program to basically contain both on-site learning and the component after they finish the on-site classes, where we actually loaned them the second-hand laptop so that they could bring it home, and we attached virtual mentors to these women who would give them homework. In the first iteration and the second one, we realized that nobody did their homework. And it was very demoralizing for our corporate volunteers who took pains to design the homework. And then we realized that the women were not doing homework because they didn't see the point in doing homework that was not related to their everyday lives. So we decided to customize our program and said, okay, these volunteers, you want to do skill-based volunteering, how about we create customized homework based on the goals and aspirations of these women? So some of them wanted to, work as a secretary in a multinational. They would give them secretarial kind of homework to do. Some of them wanted to start their own home business. So the volunteers would give them homework that helped them with creating invoices with software, etc. So that improved the homework doing rate quite a bit when we had customized programs. So as you can see, based on our learnings, we then improved on our program design. And one very critical thing that was really about access, which is not in terms of your Wi-Fi or broadband or whether you had gadgets, was whether the women were able to come to class. And we made sure that every single class at Daughters of Tomorrow, we provide child-minding services where volunteers come so that the women can actually attend. So I think what is unknown or little known in our community is there are a segment of population who find it difficult to afford even bus fare to get to a class. And they don't have helpers to look after their kids. So really the accessibility here we're talking about is really about the social connections and the practical resources that they have to help them get to a point or get to a place where they can learn. So that's the end of the presentation. I'm happy to answer some questions if you have any during the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tan. Our next speaker is Mr. Sunny Chan. Mr. Chan sits on the board of directors of RSVP Singapore, where he is also a volunteer. He is presently chairman of the Cyberguide program and Volunteer Learning Center. Mr. Chan, please.
Thank you, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. For Carrie, I realized you said nobody to call. Call us. We will get your computer up and running. There's no charges. Right? That is at RSVP. Well, today what I'm going to cover is about RSVP and programs that we have developed in conjunction with IMDA to carry out the digital inclusion and digital literacy under the digital community. And also we work with Apple on all the lifestyle type of products, which is book authoring, iMusic, iArts, or the iMovie, iPhotos, and so forth, which we will show you later on, and some of the challenges that we encounter. Go to the next slide. Okay, what is RSVP? RSVP is an organization for senior volunteers. We provide a platform where senior volunteers can actually add values to the society by doing programs such as befriending, which is one of the programs that we train our people on the soft sciences of befriending. And in actual fact, the Khoo Teck Puat Hospital took it up with their nurses all trained on befriending. And they found at the end of the result, they did an empirical study, and they found that after they discharged 100 patients with this program, 70 of them didn't come back. Only 30 of them came back. So you can imagine the magnifying gain, from the hospital standpoint. I still remember those days when I have to bring my mother to be admitted in the A&E. You can never find a ward bed. You probably have to wait 2-3 days before you can find. And they're building bigger and bigger hospitals. So such kind of programs can be used by all the hospitals in Singapore, and therefore will provide even more spaces for people. And besides that, there are many other programs that RSVP has that will actually engage senior to pick up the kind of programs that they can participate in, and which also in their field of interest. Okay. What are the programs that I would like to focus on Cyberguide training? Earlier, we talked about seniors. We have actually young seniors which are very IT savvy. Doesn't mean all seniors are not. All right, the young seniors are those that are 40 years and 45, around there, and they retired early, or they get out of job early, and they can be very productive in that area. You can see that over the years that we have carried out training, we have actually at least covered more than 50,000 of seniors. Each year we train at least 2,000 to 3,000 seniors on all the digital products. And we actually work that digital training packages with IMDA, so that it becomes like a community where instead of random, blindfolding, throwing your dart and hopefully you hit a bullseye, we actually went in to target the types of programs that are essential for people who actually don't even have education and they speak dialects. So try to train someone in dialects. I think you can find that it's a real challenge, because they don't speak one kind of dialects. They have Chinese dialects, you have Malays, you have Indians, and so forth. So in a multiracial society like ours, dialects becomes a real challenge. But we have a group of trainers that are specifically trained that they can interpret it to their own dialects and communicate it and connect with these people. For instance, recently we just ran another program. We ran many programs with C3A at the SAC, called Senior Activity Centers. But recently we ran a tremendous program with NEA. They just won very focused training on people who actually needs to know how to use email, because they receive your email that the salary has been deposited, they say where, and they have to learn about iBanking, e-payment, very simply communicated to them, and using their cell phone. You don't need a computer, because not everybody has a computer, but a smartphone they have. So as you could see, these are the programs earlier that I mentioned, the two sets of programs that we actually put together. Like for Windows types of program, we actually have people, that can do those programs that they selected appropriately for them. Instead of just kind of shower them with all the programs that you have, and actually at the end of it, they forgot what they have learned. So on focus program where they can get what they call deliverables. At the end of the day, what do they get out of it? They can use them. So what they learn, they can apply. So you can see out here, and I will probably take the question and answer later on. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chan. Finally, please join me in welcoming Mr. Koh Kong Meng. He has close to 30 years of experience in the IT industry. He is currently the General Manager and Managing Director for HP Inc., Southeast Asia and Korea. He also sits on the IT Advisory Council for the Singapore Chinese Chamber of Commerce and Industry.
Thank you. Good afternoon. If you guys don't mind, I'm going to use this microphone and sort of stand closer to you. It's been a long time since I've been in a lecture theatre like this, 30 years ago. I'm already a senior. Young senior, okay. I'm not sure that sounds right, but okay. You guys must be wondering why it's a guy like me from the corporate world standing here in front of you. I've been inspired by all the speakers also addressing the needs of seniors, of underserved communities, as particularly women in Singapore. I'd just like to share with you HP's perspective, and hopefully we can get some conversation going as well as a dialogue about how we can do this better. But first, a little bit of what HP is about, right? We have right now about a history of 80 years. We started way back when one of the original founders of Silicon Valley. But the HP that I'm from, which is HP Inc., basically we sell laptops as well as printers. And right now we're also moving into the future of Industry 4.0 or smart manufacturing with our 3D printing technology. So all this means that as a tech company based in Silicon Valley, but also in all the communities around the world, we take digital inclusion very seriously. In fact, we take all sorts of inclusion, including diversity, very seriously within the company. And that's part of our DNA and part of our culture. Okay. Quickly, for those of you who don't really know what HP is, Fortune 500 company, about $60 billion of revenue. We operate in 170 countries. In Singapore, we have a pretty large site. In fact, it's one of the largest sites in Asia Pacific. We've been here since the 70s. So very long and deep history in Singapore. We've got about 4,000 employees. And in fact, many of them are very engaged in the communities that we are working and living in as a result. Before we go into the more specific topic of digital inclusion, I think it's useful to inform us of where the broader global direction is. And we've sort of identified 4 mega trends, if you will. And these are trends which are impacting communities, impacting the planet, individuals all around the world. Rapid urbanization, for example, and that is going to be a key pressure point as more people move towards cities. How do you plan for that? How do you improve your services? How do you plan for the fact that some cities are growing at rates of 10% a year in terms of population? Cities like Jakarta, Manila, which is just our very close neighbors, right? They are bursting at the seams in terms of what the infrastructure today can provide. Changing demographics, and we are feeling that impact particularly strongly in Singapore, right? We just became the country with the world's longest life expectancy. And more than half the population is actually now above 40. So I'm happy I'm in the majority now. What kind of services do we provide in health is especially important. How do we make sure that all our seniors have access to digital services, have access to all the things that's required to be able to survive, in today's very digital world. Right? My parents are in their 70s, close to 80s, and I gave them a couple of phones probably about maybe 5 years ago. At first, they don't know what to use it for. Now they're on WhatsApp, at least they know what's happening within the family. They are in our chat groups, right? But it is a challenge that we all have to face up to. Hyper-globalization. That means that we think we are very digitally enabled in Singapore. Wow, okay. We think we are very digitally enabled in Singapore. But the truth is, so are many of our even neighbors. Okay, the city with the largest number of Twitter and most active Twitter users is Jakarta. Okay, they used to be the city with the largest number of Facebook users, but not anymore. And innovation. So, how does HP view digital inclusion? It's how can we serve these three areas or focus areas well, from a planet, people, as well as community point of view. Across three spectrum, how do we give better access? How do we improve literacy? How do we improve participation? And the last point is where I think key strength of HP is, because it's part of our DNA. We have many groups within HP that reach out to communities. In fact, today, in this building downstairs, we have about 35 employees from HP volunteering to teach seniors how to use technology, particularly smartphones. We've got several other programs around the region as well as around Singapore to be able to do that. What we believe is that for these programs to succeed and for HP to make an impact, it has to be long-term and it has to be sustainable. It's not just a one-off the block, and we don't do it just for the sake of having good or positive PR. We do it for two reasons. One, we believe that we need to contribute to the communities that we are in. And secondly, we also feel that we need to give our employees more than one reason to come to work every day, right? Apart from just receiving a paycheck, they need to feel that it's part of something bigger. So if I have time, I'd like to just end on this note.
Thank you, Mr. Koh. May I now welcome back Dr. Soon as Chairperson, along with our panelists, Mr. Buay, Ms. Tan, Mr. Chan, Mr. Anderson, and Mr. Koh for the Q&A session.
I'm online. Hi, good afternoon. Welcome back. Thank you, all the panelists, for speaking rising to the challenge and speaking in such a concise fashion about the work that you have done. We have some questions coming in, but just a very quick one from me. I mean, most of you talk about the work that you do with various communities, and in HP's case as well as Singtel's case, the work that you do with communities around the world. So if we look at all the research and all the work that's been done and published on digital inclusion and helping different vulnerable segments of the population connect to the online world and to use technology effectively, we come across a whole spectrum of impediments. If I were to ask each of you, very quickly, to kind of zoom in on and identify one key impediment you think is the most dominant and comes across from the work that you've done with various communities. Perhaps we can start with Bryn.
Thank you. Yeah, I was hoping you weren't going to start with me, but that's all right. I'll. So a biased answer, of course, related to what I do, and I think that it's really. Someone talked about mindset earlier on, and I think the best way to describe this is to talk about my own attitude towards my own disability, which for the majority of my adult life was really based in shame, which is bizarre, So I had to go through this education in order to overcome just barriers with myself, and I think that if I look beyond myself, that I don't have that shame doesn't purely come from me. That comes from a lot of that shame is based on society's feedback that I've had growing up. So I think that an understanding of the consequences of not including people and the shame or the psychological sort of impact that has on these marginalised groups, I suppose for me is the number one barrier that creates a kind of us and them. So breaking that down, the us and them barrier and the shame that comes with it, I think.
I think my experience working in the region, and I can only speak for the majority, outside of Singapore, the majority of Southeast Asia, it is the access to education. That's very key. Most governments in the region, they all have digital literacy programs, and they're really ramping up in terms of educating their school children today on IT. Unfortunately, reality is programs like that cannot reach everywhere. We've been involved in rollouts of IT in schools for the longest time. And even today, there are some schools where, forget about PCs or notebooks, they don't even have access to electricity or clean running water. So how can you talk about having IT inclusion when such basics are not in place? So there are certain things which are needed as part of the infrastructure to be able to get there. And I'm very happy to say, at least, in the last 5 to 10 years, the economies around the region are growing very fast, and they can afford now to invest a lot more in education.
I think maybe for me, I speak from the experience of operating in Singapore, and I mean, we're a very small country, we're highly developed, so we don't really have the usual impediments like infrastructure or that kind of physical access. I think related to Bryn's point about shame is the fact that when we're working with underserved communities, I think the key impediment is really social isolation, and that isolation stems a lot from shame. And because of this social isolation due to various kinds of stigma or simply the fact that financial scarcity prevents people from participating socially, there is a lack of social connection. And I think this is something that is kind of counterintuitive, because when we think about digital literacy, we think about connectedness, about how technology helps people to connect. But for these communities, before we even get to the access of that digital access, it's the lack of connection that kind of creates a barrier. So we have all the gadgets, we have the infrastructure, but why is it not getting to these communities? Is because we don't understand as a society the people whose lives are very different from ours, because their lives have been, for many years, very isolated. So the impediment is really the lack of human understanding of who really our target audience is. Yeah.
Well, what are my impediments? I think I try to recall back, and actually it's mainly people, programs, and organization. People, in the sense, is that we need to look at, because the organization itself are working with volunteers. And volunteers are not paid. They just get reimbursed just for the transportation and maybe a bottle of drinks, something like that. So how to keep them motivated with passion that you can sustain a strategy, a training roadmap for them to continue. So in actual fact, that troubles me a lot, and that's why today we actually implement with Apple computers training people in Windows, because we can do it on the dual boot environment. Either you boot up Windows, you train people on Windows, and you boot up OS, and then you train people on Apple products and so forth. Because this way we try to optimize. At the same time, we introduce new type of training, which in the past most of them are actual Windows, except for Apple is iOS using the iPad. But today, there are iPhones. I think they can be a little bit more economically, viable. I think there will be more people using it. But that's only one part of the equation. The other part is programs and strategy. The programs are integrated in the strategy of our roadmap, so that for those IT savvy, they can actually do coding all the way to e-commerce site development, as well as apps development. And in that area, at least we know we're going to keep them very occupied for this group of savvy people. All right. Then for those who are not IT savvy, then we become selective on the type of training for them. Instead of bombarding them with just a charade of all the training programs, and they, some of them are so enthusiastic, they attend the program sometimes 3 or 5 times. And we ask them, why you attend the program so many times? They say, I forget. All right? I mean, after you come out, you forget. You go back to the classroom again, in that sense. So these are things, massive demands, as you could see in one of the slides. 900,000 people are going to be coming out. What are we going to do? So we have a strategy that we are going to work closely with IMDA, is that how do we do cascading training? That's one way, is that we will train the trainer, so they will use their trainer, because with our people, we only have about 100 trainers. We can never train. You need 30 years, to train all of them. There's no way, by that time,
So you're talking about the trainers, right? Having to increase, say, the number of volunteers you have to help you do your work.
That's right. So that's a real challenge.
Thank you. Andrew?
Thank you. I think 2 impediments but opportunities. One is what I spoke about. I've worked across the region in places like Philippines. I think we have largely solved access for mobile and internet to the bottom of the pyramid. But like I mentioned, now with that access, it has all the benefits, but there are also a lot of unintended consequences. And it's really about addressing that, because it's about preserving the good and the benefits of our industry, whereas we are seeing everything from identity, mental health issues, and we have seen suicide cases, from all the stuff that's happening, or addiction. A lot of our kids here have addiction to online gaming and social media. The other impediment, in a sense, but it's the opportunity, is actually telecoms and mobile access and internet access is no longer a basic necessity. It's almost a given. But it's about the healthcare, the education was mentioned, and we do see the opportunity of digitization to actually try and bring this to areas that don't have. And we have a lot of case examples of technologies that have brought psychology counseling to remote farmers in Australia that's suffering from depression and suicide during droughts and things like that. So I do see those as much opportunities going forward.
A few members of the audience are quite concerned about this particular question. Now, the purpose of this symposium that's organized by IPS and IMDA really is to bring experts, practitioners, and concerned individuals from the 3P sector together, beyond information sharing, but also to engage in discussions on how to better grow digital inclusion in the myriad ways that we identify. So this question surrounds, I guess, the consolidation of efforts. So clearly there are many people and organizations like yours which are doing very important work to help close digital divides and possibly digital chasms as well. So how do you think such efforts can be consolidated and reach people who might not know that such help is available? So here, I think the underpinning message is, is there room for partnership? How might that partnership look like, and what can we do?
Maybe I can comment first. I think even the phrasing, the concept of digital divide, to me, is really has to be looked at or understood in the context of social divide. Right? We don't understand the communities that we're trying to serve because we don't hang out with them, we hardly talk to them. So I think in terms of collaboration, and what we do particularly well at Daughters of Tomorrow is we tend to kind of appear at the strangers' events that don't have a very direct link. And we try to understand people from different sectors, and so hence we have friends and partners from the tech sector, from healthcare sector, different kinds of sectors. And I think the amazing thing about that is how much are we stepping out of our comfort zone, whether it's in terms of our socioeconomic strata or cultural strata or whatever groups or silos that we're operating in, to understand the other. And I think something that we've managed to achieve, because we're so kepo and curious, is that from that divide where we have a 25-year-old woman who hasn't touched a laptop in years and doesn't know Microsoft Word and Office, etc. We now have women working in the AI industry doing data labeling, and 4 of them just got hired by a big data company just last month. So I think it's really about that social connection. And I think collaboration has to be steeped in a willingness to really step into the other person's world, to understand how that operates, and to find where the synergies and the points of partnerships and opportunities are. Yeah.
Can I just add, as the earlier speakers were talking just now on the stage, something struck me, which was many of us are doing the same thing in our own way, right? We're training underserved communities, Sunny with seniors, Carol with women or in the lower 10%. Could we, for example, build a digital marketplace of service providers who are able to provide such services? We have also a lot of volunteers in HP, but it tends to be fragmented. Every organization, every team wants to do things their way, which is fine, I think. But there are a lot of people who want to do good, and there's a lot of demand where we don't know where that is. Why not create a marketplace in the middle, at least on the supply side, to be able to channel all those resources and figure out a way to match that demand to these resources. And that's where I think a lot of the NGOs can come into play. You guys know where the demand is, but maybe not where the supply can come from or the resources can come from. If we can create something in the middle, and we're all digital these days, we've got all sorts of Uberization going on. Why not create one for not just digital inclusion, but social services?
Hello. Okay. I was just thinking back that when the first time we tried to reach out to telco companies like Singtel, it took us a while running around. At the end, the answer is no, because they don't know us enough, all right? And we work with HP through IMDA. I was ex-HP as well. Anyway, and HP seems to come forward to provide what we call assistant trainers that will help us during that National Silver IT Fest program, because on the year-to-year basis, they send like, 30, 40 or 60 of these people over the 3 days that help us to facilitate the program. We may have trainers, but we don't have so many assistant trainers. In fact, most of their assistant trainer can be the trainer, but because they're not familiar with the programs that we are conducting. At the same time, training senior is quite different from just taking any trainers to go there and train senior, because they run so fast and the senior cannot catch up. Okay, so I think collaborations and consolidation is only when you can see leveraging. As you could see, RSVP in the last half year or so, they've been publicly marketing itself, on radios, on TVs, on CNA and so forth, so that people would know that there is an organization trying to reach out, trying to provide the service. And we have to do it not just English program, because we have to cover it also Mandarin program. So when you launch one English program, the next one is a Mandarin program. Right? Thank you.
I fully agree collaboration is an opportunity. In fact, it's quite interesting. We run a lot of regional programs in the community across the region. We find it a lot easier to forge collaborations in places like Australia. We struggle sometimes in Singapore. But having said that, if you look at our programs like the Cyber Wellness Hotline, actually it's a multi-stakeholder collaboration between government, and we brought together Touch and Fayette services, because we've identified that within the partnership there's actually complementary services. We don't duplicate them, we actually fund to connect them together. And even the DQ framework that I was sharing, that's one of the reasons why we're trying to establish a framework that then creates a bit more structure to identify who is playing in what field globally, not just locally. Because, for example, there could already be very good material and assets and knowledge and programs overseas, but because today there's no sense of where they are, where they play, and which area of the digital quotient, they are not tapped, and there's a lot of duplication happening. So something like the DQ framework and the digital intelligence framework is actually to try and create a bit of that common understanding of what's out there, to be able to actually foster global type collaboration, so that even gaps in the equation can be identified, because today there's a lot of duplication efforts in certain areas and certain aspects of skills and knowledge and skills. Maybe there's no players in those areas.
There's one point that I miss out is to actually have the sustainability, we create programs, for instance, in conjunction with ITE West, that they actually train our people how to program drones and fly the drones. But they are not industrial drones. They are all commercial, like children playing. But at least, the seniors are quite excited that they can program the drones, not by using the controls at all. So these are things that actually challenges them to continue, their commitment to become volunteers in the area.
Yeah, just very quickly, I think my colleagues have probably talked enough about how partnerships can be fostered and established from business to NGOs and things like that. But I also think there are initiatives like the UN Corporate Social Responsibility Initiatives, which provide a kind of, not partnership in the sense that, us two working together, but we can still be running towards the same goal. And I think that does a lot. If we rally around a common objective, it creates a different type of partnership or camaraderie in the name of, inclusion. Yeah.
So you talk about using existing frameworks, so then we are no longer just limiting collaborations to within a local context, but across borders, across countries. I think there's a mention about increasing publicity, so that not just the segments that you're targeting are aware of the services and the help that you're providing, but also, highlight to potential collaborators and partners that indeed organizations like yours are doing some of these work, right? So the next question requires a little bit of foresight from each of you, which I'm sure, given the work you've done, you have absolutely no problem in. The question is, what can be done to identify potential or new digital divides that may be resulting from emerging technologies? So this morning, towards the end of his keynote, Kim Andreasen talked about the coming trends, right, that are taking place in tech development. So besides 5G, there's, of course, big data, there is VR, augmented reality, etc. And while those are trends, I think he kind of alluded to some potential threats as well. So what do you think can be done to identify currently unimagined or unforeseen divides?
I'm going to cheat a little bit here and refer to some of the speakers that came before me. I think that I think there's absolutely a trend and a connection between what's happening socially, or I talked about the physical world and the divides that exist there, and then what happens when that moves over to the digital world. I think machine learning, AI, pose a fundamental threat to marginalised groups in that, as I and others have been banging on about today, if industry continues to design for the happy medium and to marginalise the 20%, they will just not be included in the algorithms that we'll all rely on moving forward. So in an increasingly digital world, that is a really number one concern, I would say. Yeah, let's talk more about that.
I used to run Singtel Venture Capital. That means you invest in long-term technology investments. And that's also a reason why we created the Singtel Future Makers program, social innovation, because actually a lot of the vision and innovation doesn't necessarily come from big corporates. So when we run the social innovation program, actually we're identifying very breakthrough digitization and innovations and technologies. They're coming from startups, and they're also coming from the marginalized segments, the people we call the marginalized segments of our community who have suffered long enough, but because now they have access to innovation and technology, are actually developing fairly leading-edge innovations that are solving for issues that they've long experienced. And I was giving really an example of a company that we worked with in Australia called Exceptional, where they have developed online digital assessments and algorithms to be able to pick up the relevant and the right competencies in the autistic spectrum, because there's certain skill sets that are very relevant for things like cybersecurity and certain types of high-tech skills, etc., which a HR hiring process will never pick up, nor would they even show up for these interviews because maybe their social or other cognitive aspects. But again, we're seeing such amazing innovations that as big corporate, we would never have looked at it from those lenses. And again, maybe it's those marginalized players that are developing the innovations. We found many of these can be mainstream to also apply into other areas for mainstream benefit. And I can go on with a lot of examples.
Yeah, I just want to very quickly follow up with that, and because you're really hitting the nail on the head there. You're going out and including people that would not otherwise not be included, and that's ultimately what I'm saying for the AI machine learning innovation space, right? If you're not including the edges of society, they won't be factored in. Yeah. Thanks.
I have a few observations here. We heard a lot about 5G and so forth, but you can imagine the layers and layers of protection being built around it. You think it's going to run like 5G or maybe like 3G, with all this overloading protection that you put in, they're not going to run at that speed, that's for sure. So something that we need to think about, who is responsible, to actually take care of those, because the people with the supercomputer can do that. I mean, in your home, even your fastest computer you have, you're not going to run. You can transmit a file and then nobody receive it, and you wonder what happened. So that's one area we need to think about. In the area of AI, the heuristic action that's built into AI today is so enormous that we have to be very careful on some of the ethical issues, because these are something that, you need to study. It's not just AI, because AI can implement without feelings, all right? And then it can be unethical. That's something that we need to think about it. Thank you.
Okay, so we talked about technology, and coming from a tech company, I think technology is always an enabler. So I'm an optimist as far as new tech is concerned. And even things like AI, for example, it can be challenging and it can be used to exclude people, but at the same time, it can also be used to include more people. For example, it could be easier to code with AI to make it more inclusive. So instead of having a team of developers just separately coding for visually impaired people, you could use AI tools to do it a lot more efficiently. And you could do it a lot more cheaply for many different groups of people. So that's one way of looking at it. Same for 5G, even 3D manufacturing, which HP has, right? Those could be used to include a lot more communities than not. But what I think some of the biggest threats in terms of digital divides are concerned is social. We already see that a lot online. Whatever social media or medium you look at, communities are being formed that is very exclusive, right? Not just in the United States, where we see a lot of that happening, but also across the world. And society is, because of the ease of use of linking up with people who are like-minded, society has become a lot more stratified. So, and it's easier to get with people that think like you or look like you. And if we don't break down those barriers, I think that would be the biggest threat to all of us, or to society in general.
Maybe I want to add, at risk of sounding like a broken recorder, because I think my perspective would be very much more coming from a perspective of the social part. And I think something that I've observed is the increasing lengths of time that people are spending on gadgets and the interactions, the human to machine interactions is going to outweigh a lot more than the human to human interaction. And you can see that in the children these days, the amount of time they spend interacting with the device rather than real world interaction. So I have a concern about potential future divides along the lines of what does it do to the emotional intelligence of the next generation, and what does it speak of what is human interaction going to look like in the future? I don't want to be very bleak about it, and I do try to see the silver lining, which is the fact that with increasing mechanization and digital interfaces, perhaps human interaction is going to be so rare that it's going to be valued higher. And I think the other skills that involve people understanding emotional intelligence, EQ, empathy, is going to be something that's going to be worth a lot in the market, to be a very pragmatic way of looking at it. So something to think about, like what can we foresee would be necessary that we take for granted now, that we need to incorporate into the future education system to ensure that there is real-world interaction and to ensure that our children are growing up to be emotionally healthy adults instead of only capable of interacting over a screen. Yeah.
Great points. Before I take more questions from Pigeonhole, is there anyone who would like to ask a question unmediated by technology? Yes, Natalie.
I have a question about
Thank you. I guess I have a question about actually something that was touched on, alluded to in some of the presentations, which is the fact that lots of tech companies are also taking over functions that are, I guess, to use the word traditionally, loosely, associated with the state or with financial institutions like banks and so on. I wonder, if the panel has anything to say about that, because it has, for instance, implications in terms of who we interact with, for instance, on social media, what makes up our sense of identity. I think Kong Meng alluded to that, when you talked about how people are actually kind of interacting in silos. Even, the sort of institutional, the kind of transactions we typically, in the past deal with the state are now mediated by tech companies. So I wonder if the panel, from your own perspective, has, I guess, thoughts about what this means in your respective groups, and also in particular the tech companies who are here, if you have anything to say about that as well.
Okay, so while you ponder your answer over this challenging question, I realized from Pigeonhole that we have quite many questions pertaining to seniors. Maybe a bunch of us have just been promoted to seniors, and that's why. So I'm going to ask this question, and Sunny probably will take it, but if there's anyone else on the panel who's interested, please go ahead. So the question is, how can we better harness technology to provide digital coaching for seniors, even while we recognize that some personal hand-holding or personal interaction is important? So I'm not sure if this is a slight paradox to you, but would like to hear your thoughts on that. So maybe we can have the panels to answer Natalie's question first, and then we'll come to Sunny after that.
Yeah, it's a good question, an interesting debate, and there isn't like a right or a wrong answer to that. So just, it's good because I get to clarify my very negative take on AI. I'm not against AI and machine learning at all. I just think there are some considerations. And the same here, just because it takes away an interaction, a human interaction, we're not going into the bank anymore, that doesn't mean that we should prevent this technological advancement, right? And for people that can't go down the bank anyway, because they physically can't get there or they have some sort of anxieties around it, this provides them with autonomy and independence and a huge opportunity. So I think that, there's always two sides to the coin. But I'm 100% for more digitalization.
My view would be, governance, policy, regulations has failed to keep pace. Because I can't remember which of the earlier speakers spoke about the issue of all this technology and digitization. It's very amorphous, it's multinational, it's cross-border, right? When generally all these regulations and policies and so forth have been established primarily at a state level. But I think having said that, there are enough lessons out there, without mentioning names of companies, that eventually it catches up. So I think even as high-tech companies, there's got to be a realization that, again, even if you have those opportunities, there's the good side and the dark side. You need to know what is the line that needs to be drawn, that you fall into the dark side where technology has its negative consequences, and that you're facilitating that negative consequences. Because eventually it does come back to issues of reputation, social responsibility, license to operate. And as you're seeing, some of these companies actually now are getting clamped down very hard by governments, by regulators who are starting to act in tandem globally, right? And you see that in the EU, you now see that in Asia with some of the Christchurch type issues in Asia and so forth. So I think it's a matter of time. So why do things that then creates a situation that governments and regulators have to come down hard? I think as big companies, we owe it to do the right thing and set the right, be a right role model in that regards.
I think, to Natalie's question, and I must preface this, whatever I'm saying now is just my own opinion, personally, nothing to do with my company. I don't think any company sets out to take over functions of organs of state. No company I know intentionally does that. There may be some instances where there is a need, and that need has not been filled by a government or a regulatory body. I'll give you an example: cryptocurrency. Right, that is one very obvious function which has grown out of a need to have a verifiable currency online. And that is supranational, right? Today, we have all types of cryptocurrency, and it's actually spawned a technology called blockchain, which is actually very useful. But that, to be fair, wasn't created by any large organization or company. It was created by actually a small, very, very small group of individuals. The first one, which to this day we don't know really who that person is. The other case would be a case of, as Andrew mentioned, regulations not being or not keeping pace with technological innovation. And that's something that's very real, right? I talk about the mega trends. Innovation has accelerated tremendously in the last, let's say, even 5 years with AI, etc. And how do policymakers tackle that? Because the speed of regulation and the speed of innovation are totally separate. Somehow we have to figure out a way to increase the speed of regulation or even overtake the regulation, the speed of innovation, so that we are able to, if not legislate, then be aware of all these changes.
I will just add, if we look at it, who actually regulates the apps that is put into the internet for us to download? We know the names of the organization: Apple Store, right? Google Play, right? They are the ones who actually collect a fee for your registration so that your apps can be downloaded. What are they doing about it? They allow it to go into, create trouble, and then you catch them and then correct it. So something has to be a floodgate to put up front to filter it. And if they are the one who collect the fees, then I think they are the one who has to implement the first floodgate, check and balance.
In a way, I suppose my function of sustainability is about that topic, right? It's about how companies, despite the need to grow, to be profitable, do things in a way that one have the right values and self-regulate. In fact, it's an issue, it's almost self-regulate. How do you self-regulate responsibly so that you don't create all these unintended consequences that can happen from the result of our business? And it really comes down to that.
Sunny, would you like to take the question on seniors?
Okay, on
learning?
seniors. Okay. Yes, one of the things about seniors is that if we take training programs that are developed through IMDA's consultants and so forth, we often we face the problem, the trainers themselves has a problem to train. Remember, I showed one slide that on the Windows, under digital community, there are 8 programs there. IMDA felt that I think we have 1 trainers that can do all the 8 programs. I think they will just drop dead at the end of the program. Because each senior only can do 3 hours. So you can imagine 8 programs, you will do 24 hours, right? So how do we do? So we went back to IMDA and said, why don't you come and train our trainers? So they actually brought in 8 trainers to train our trainers. I said, well, that's different. I don't have 8 trainers. That's luxury, all right? So one way I did was actually I assigned 3 trainers to each of those 8 programs. So each trainer must be able to do at least 2 to 3 programs. That means the 3 trainers should be able to cover the 8 programs. I mean, if I'm now the trainer, the other two will become my assistant trainer in that respect. So by doing that, by spreading out the load, we can conduct all the 8 programs, by summarizing it. Some of it are very straightforward, email. You make sure that the participants actually created an email account. Otherwise, by the time they walk into a class, you create the email account, go home, finish already. All right.
So here you're talking about still training through volunteers, right, face-to-face contact. So I think the question, the person asking the question was wondering, is there a way for us to design, some programs somehow using tech to teach elderly tech? I'm not sure if that's a paradox to you. Andrew has a comment on that. Then after that, we'll see if Sunny has more to add.
I actually don't have an answer, but I think if we throw out that problem, there'll be some creative individual who will find the solutions, whether they are looking at video-based or interactive-based or virtual reality. Like for example, one of our startups was thrown the problem, we got insufficient care workers dealing with disabilities and they're inadequately trained, not enough trainers. And one of the tech startups developed a whole interactive training for disabilities using both virtual reality and another one using interactivity that takes a first-line level training so that by the time the physical resource that comes in that's scarce, then that individual takes the training a lot deeper. You see? So there's probably an opportunity to look at things like that. And we don't have the answers, but someone out there will have if you throw the problem out there.
Actually, there were answers already at least 15 years ago. The reason is because we did an interactive video training program. But 1 hour of training program required 13 hours of video time in order to learn that 1 hour of lesson. And that's too long. So we came up with what they call a self-paced program. We developed it together with the Motorola Training Center in Chicago. Right? And they did it quite well so that the operator can actually attend a training program when the line is down. And then when the line is up, they switch back and they continue to work without having to go to, attend classes.
So one final question as a roundup. Any panelists can take it. So in your view, how would you rate Singapore's effort in closing digital divides? And which aspect do you think needs to be strengthened to help close the gap or the chasm? So rating Singapore's progress, efforts, just a quick 1 minute download.
I think Singapore efforts is actually very well organized. The only question is because it is so organized, sometimes it takes time for anything else to change. So because they have to go through so many structures before you can change anything. And I think that is something you require a fighter to really work with them. Because if you are not a fighter, you will just get tired and you surrender.
Okay. Excellent. Anyone else? Andrew?
Having worked across the region, and I'm not saying this to butter up Singapore government, I think we do a great job. We sometimes may be a bit slower, but when we put our minds to it, we actually execute really well and with quite a long-term view. Again, I think the area is back to what I mentioned earlier, as we're really pushing digital inclusion. Part of the digital readiness is that broader set of knowledge, acumen, skills that goes beyond the hard technical skills, the use of the device and e-commerce. It relates to all the social, the emotional, the EQ, the discernment, the judgments, because it's going to be all those soft elements that will de-risk some of the negative consequences once you have a device in the hands of every individual. And I think that's what we've got to solve for systematically, from kids to parents to education to every player in the ecosystem. And it has to be a very joint effort there.
I think I'll echo Andrew. I think there's definitely a lot being done by the government, and I'm personally very impressed that when the whole anti-diabetes movement came up, that the Fitbits were out there in the community centres, the young people were there setting it up for the old people so they can use a Fitbit to connect to their phones and walk. I think the effort is tremendous. It's a lot of great intentions. And what we're missing here really is that last mile, where you need the expertise of people working within communities, and the communities themselves there's tremendous potential for the members of the underserved communities themselves to be enrolled in partnership, in collaboration with the various larger systems and structures and schemes to really reach the neighbor next to you in the other block of flat, to close that gap. I think it's really, we're just at that last mile. If we can look into that, we would be able to kind of go to the finish line. Yeah.
Well, I think the challenge is in reaching out to a lot of the fragmented communities which are underserved, because one of the challenges we have in Singapore is we are so highly literate, both from a digital as well as other points of view, but there are still underserved communities and it's not so easy to find them. How do we get more of them on board?
Any comments, Bill?
I'm not really qualified to comment on this, I don't think. But I will say that this is the first conference on inclusion that I've been where there has been someone representing the senior population on a panel, which I think speaks volumes for the efforts and the progression Singapore has made in that respect. In terms of accessibility and digital accessibility, the level of the quality of the content today has also been really exceptional. And I'm comparing that to conferences in the UK, across Scandinavia, North America as well. So I'm not qualified to comment, but if this is a snapshot of how seriously these things are taken here, it's very, very impressive.
Thank you. So thank you, everyone, and join me in thanking the panelists for holding up a tough post-lunch session.